But thanks for being here, even if it's late today and everyone is already tired from its cup. So it is a great honor to have you here today. So I'm David Albertani, I'm the CEO of Catalytic Finance Foundation. And today we are here to speak about financing SDGs in Africa. So I'm very grateful to be here today with you, and we are co-hosting this event with the African Development Bank. And without further ado, I will give the floor to Gareth Phillips, the Manager of Climate and Environmental Finance at AFDB, to set up the scene and give us a keynote. Thank you, Gareth.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed. Give me some love to get me started. So this is like day 6, I think, and one more day to go, and then we get a rest day. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you very much indeed for all the effort to come this evening instead of heading straight back to your hotel. So indeed, as I was introduced, my name is Gareth Phillips. I'm the Manager of Climate and Environmental Finance at the African Development Bank, we were very happy to be invited to join this presentation with our colleagues. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how investment and economic policies incentivize and attract private capital flows towards the Sustainable Development Goals in Africa. So it's a little bit like an exam question. But now, it's a small audience, so my audience participation is it's going to be touch and go, but I'm going to try anyway, right? For those of you, I want to know those of you, hang on, this keeps going off. I want to know those of you in the private sector in the global north. I want you to put your hands up. If you're in the private sector in the global north. Okay, so we have 1. Okay, very good. Okay, and who's in the 2? Okay, great. Who's in the private sector in the global south? Luke. Okay, very good. So we've a small sample, but anyway, I'm going to come back to this later on, so don't forget that I raised that point. So now, let's move on to the progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, I'm not an SDG expert, so I did a bit of research. I Googled progress on the SDGs, and actually it didn't take me very long to find out that we're not doing very well. In fact, it was the first item that came up, was the SDG 2023 report. I might have to repeat my audience participation. I've got a double sample size now. Yes, please come in and sit down, and don't hesitate to move up this way, because the panel's going to sit here. Don't pay attention to me. The panel's going to sit there. So I'm going to repeat my audience participation. No. I want to know, hands up, who works in the private sector in the global north? Any of our newcomers work in the private sector in the global north? Still 2, okay. And anybody in the private sector in the global south? No change. Okay, not to worry, not to worry. So, anyway, I looked at the SDG report, and I'm going to quote from you because it was a bit sobering what I read, the SDG 23 report. Hold on, I'm struggling with the technology. A reality check. It reads as follows: a reality check of the progress made on the SDGs at the midpoint towards 2030 revealed significant challenges. The latest global level data and assessments from custodian agencies paint a concerning picture. Of the approximately 140 targets that can be evaluated, half of them show moderate or severe deviations from the desired trajectory. Furthermore, more than 30% of these targets have experienced no progress, or even worse, regression below the 2015 baseline. This assessment underscores the urgent need for intensified efforts to ensure the Sustainable Development Goals stay on course and progress towards a sustainable future for all. So, not a glowing report card. Interestingly, we're all here at COP28, and I wonder if that report card rings a bell with any of you for another recently published report card, the Global Stocktake, where we're also not particularly well on track. And what I asked was, what do these have in common? Well, they're both voluntary-driven commitments. And the point here is that if we look at the question that I was asked, is how do investment and economic policies incentivize and attract private capital flows towards the SDGs in Africa, then really I have to conclude that I suspect with the present company of some of the presentations we're going to hear, which will confound my conclusion. But to be honest, I have to conclude that it's not working, that current investment and economic policies are not driving investment into the SDGs in Africa or elsewhere in the world. So let's move now to look at one of the major problems as to why these public good activities don't get funded. And for me, this is a massive, big, red flashing light, and I can't understand why everybody else doesn't immediately agree. Because most public good projects, be they for the Sustainable Development Goals or for particularly adaptation in the Paris Agreement, the problem is that most of these projects don't yield cash flows. It's obvious, and if you don't get a cash flow, then as a private sector developer, you can't get a return on your equity, and you can't borrow cash, you can't raise debt to implement a project. So it's not surprising that the private sector doesn't really engage in doing these kinds of projects. We get some corporate social responsibility money, but that's not the kind of scale of funding that we need. Project sector developers need money, and they also need things like labor and land and indigenous technology and biodiversity and so on in order to develop these projects. But without a cash flow, they can't make a return on their equity, and they can't access the debt capital markets to borrow money. And that's why most public good projects are implemented by public sector or not-for-profit organizations using money from climate funds, donors, philanthropies, and so on. And in doing so, they miss out on all the entrepreneurial skills and the innovation and the equity sweat that the private sector brings when they come to work in these spaces. Now, I don't think it's all bad news, because actually we've been in a sort of similar situation before, and if we cast our minds back, I don't know if any of you were involved in it, but in the early days of the carbon markets, in the late 1990s, we developed mechanisms to address these problems. And what we see is that today the mitigation space shows us that the private sector can be asked, and indeed required, to contribute towards public good projects. Because we do see a lot of corporates taking on net zero targets. They have corporate social responsibility programs to offset their emissions. And of course, many of them participate in mandatory emission trading schemes where they are required to purchase carbon or whatever kinds of units are allowed. So this begs the question, should we be doing more of this for public good projects in the SDGs? And how would that work? Well, of course, I wouldn't ask that question if I didn't have an answer. And I'm going to tell you briefly about a mechanism that we're developing at the African Development Bank called the Adaptation Benefits Mechanism. I won't say too much because my colleague Monique is going to present some slides on it, so I don't want to steal her thunder. But I just want to clarify or to explain briefly what it is. The Adaptation Benefits Mechanism is designed to create what we call certified adaptation benefits. And these are for sale to developed country governments, corporates, and private sector, global north private sector actors. So that's the two people in the room who put their hand up to say they were from global north private sector actors. So we want you to buy these certified adaptation benefits. And of course, the revenues that you will pay for those certified adaptation benefits will go to our global south project developers or private sector actors who will use that money to access debt to build the projects and then repay the debt from the sale. So it's not rocket science. We see it happening in anybody. I mean, you have the same concept with a power purchase agreement where you sign an agreement to sell your electricity, and then you can go to the bank and borrow money to build the generator. We see the same thing in the emission markets, emission reduction markets. You sign an emission reduction purchase agreement, you can go to a bank and borrow money to build your project. So we want to do the same thing with adaptation. And actually, this is then very relevant to the Sustainable Development Goals, because what we see is there's a huge overlap between adaptation and sustainable development. And we have a project in one of our pilot projects in Côte d'Ivoire, which is being implemented by ICRAF, the World Agroforestry Centre, and the text has gone off it's too long and now I can't read it, so I'm going to have to do it from memory. There are 5 SDGs that this project contributes to. First of all, no poverty. Number 2, no hunger, decent work environment, life on land, and climate change. I think those were at least 5. Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, broadly speaking, and present company accepted, I think that the existing economic and investment policies that we have are not driving investment into the SDGs in Africa or anywhere else. And I believe that society needs to be made to pay for these public good projects. I don't think that that is a challenge. When they brought out the emissions trading schemes, all industry said, oh, no, it's not going to work, you're going to push it out of the business. It didn't happen. They just incorporated the costs into their activities. They became more efficient and reduced their emissions, and it didn't cause economies to grind to a halt. So I do believe that the private sector, consumers and so on, can be asked to pay for these public goods. There's at least one example, the adaptation benefits mechanism, which we think is an instrument that can demonstrate how funding can be channeled in a credible and transparent manner. And these actions can contribute not only to the Sustainable Development Goals, but to the global commitments in the Paris Agreement. And I think that what we need to see happening is that governments need to start signalling to the private sector that they want them to start undertaking some of these actions. They've got 10 years to work out what works for them, and then governments are going to start regulating so that the private sector can start to contribute on a level playing field and everybody can start doing their bit. So with that, I'm going to hand back to our moderator, and thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Gareth. Thanks, and great memory. So, no, thanks, Gareth. And I also want just to take a few minutes to discuss about another type of solution that we've been working on at Catalytic Finance Foundation in partnership with Pegasus Capital Advisor in the room with Paula. She will be panelist after. Gold Standard and IUCN. So this is one solution. It won't solve everything, but it's one step. We worked actively with the Green Climate Fund with the exact 2 same issues. First one is there is a huge lack of development capital. If we speak about financing SDG in Africa, everyone you will meet in MDBs and DFIs will always tell you the same story. There is no pipeline. There is no pipeline. But long story short, no one wants to finance pipeline. And so for that, you need technical assistance. You need pocket of capital that you can deploy without knowing yet if the project is or will even become bankable. You still need some safeguards, but we need to beef up the technical assistance capacities, being capacity building and project pipeline development. And so this is a first big statement. I think everyone here in the room will share that. The second one is, of course, Africa is still emerging, developing frontier market, how you want to call it. So cost of capital is and will remain an issue. Currency risk, we all know about it. So if we expect adjusted risk return, there are so few deals that will be made available. But if we look at all the SDG co-benefits, and today the carbon credit market are not encapsulating all the price of the SDG co-benefit, and definitively not the health and all the other sectors. So we need to be able to to have a lower cost of capital. So in that sense, we really started to work on blended finance. And we developed, so it took us quite a while. It was a long story and long roller coaster. I will try to do it short. A product that we call the Subnational Climate Fund. So looking at Africa, SDGs, and more broadly, most of the project and the solutions to SDGs are actually in the hand of municipalities. These are local solutions. And what we see today is most of the MDBs, DFIs will go on tickets that are greater than 100, 120 million, massive national project. And so you have a huge part of mid-sized infrastructure that's yet not tackled. And so we really wanted to focus on that sector and deploy, exactly as I mentioned, a technical assistance facility, so a grant-backed up facility to be able to do capacity building and project preparation with an equity fund. And in the equity fund, a concessional junior stack, and we've convinced the Green Climate Fund to provide $150 million as a first loss in the capital stack in order to attract a target of an additional 600 million for a total fund of 750 million. And so today the Subnational Climate Fund is up and running. So at Catalytic we manage the technical sense facility and the project preparation. To date we've already funded around 46 feasibility studies. The equity fund is up and running, and we'll hear more from Paola, and managed by Pegasus Capital Advisor. And all that is, of course, for impact. And this is why Gold Standard is in our consortium and really certifying all the impact, so that this fund, and we're very proud about it, is the first Gold Standard certified fund at fund level. So this is something we're very proud about. So I won't speak too much because honestly we have an amazing panel today. So I will just call on stage already the moderator. So I will need, because I don't have your memory, Garrett, and Luc has many hats. So Luc Gnagada, welcome, happy to have you today. So you're the former Executive Secretary of UNCDD. You are the former Minister of Environment of Benin. You are the co-chair of ABM Executive Committee, and also a board member of Gold Standard, a dear esteemed partner. So thanks, Luc, and I welcome you on stage for the great panel.
Really? Oh, cool. It's not good to be a former of so many things. It means you are a has-been, right? Well, thank you. And I'm really privileged to have such a wonderful panel. I would like to call on stage Mrs. Audrey Cynthia Yamajakol. Audrey is the coordinator of the Green Finance Facility Initiative at the African Development Bank. And next, I would like to call Paola de Almeida. Paola is the officer in charge of food, agriculture, and water investment strategy at Pegasus Capital. And Mrs. Matapelo Malao, am I correct? Thank you for sorry for any misspelling. Matapelo is head of energy and environment at DBSA. Please come on stage. And last but not least, I would like to call on Mrs. Teddy Mugabo. Teddy is the CEO of Rwanda Green Fund. And I have Monique. And of course, we will start by listening to Monique, who will bring you up to date on the ABM. You have, Gareth has alluded to ABM. Now, Monique will first present ABM, and then you and I will join force to grill the panel, right? Monique, have the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Luc. Good evening, everyone. Great to be here. So, as Garrett placed it very well, let me see. I was supposed to just click on this. Is it doing anything?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. There you go. So, I'll try to explain the innovation that we are conducting at the African Development Bank with regards to bringing value to adaptation projects so that it is beneficial to the private sector. There is an incentive there to emerge more into the adaptation type mechanism and funding. So, the carbon markets and the challenges to financing it comes from additional cash flow via the sales of emission reductions, but we propose a similar approach, but for adaptation. So we offer adaptation project developers a means to generate additional revenues from the sales of the certified adaptation benefits. So this enables project developers to access debt capital markets. As you know, the projects are investment heavy, and so it's not always the to recoup the funds is not always as easy as with emission reduction projects. And therefore, the certified adaptation benefits, they're not fungible nor tradable, but the redemption codes can be sold with a retail markup. But there is no basis for commoditization or speculation. They are designed for communicating contribution to stated adaptation needs in the host country, and their non-tradable status placed them as an option to use Article 6.8 of the Paris Agreement, which is the article that speaks about non-market approaches. I was going to say next slide, but I'm in control of it. Okay, so here I'm going to spend just a bit of time to explain a bit of the cycle of the project. I'm not sure if you can see it. There we go. Okay, so in the project cycle, we start with the project design document that you'll see at the top. And through that project design document, we will make sure to have it suitable and approved through the methodology that we will look at, which is very important to make sure that the credits that we'll be providing is verified in a transparent way, and also so that it answers the requirements of the Paris Agreement. So once that evaluation is done, we can validate then the project. We can have it registered, and the next step after that would be to have it then implemented. Oop, hold on. There we go. Right. So post-registration, as I was saying, then we have the registration. After the registration started, we have then the implementation of the project, where we'll also monitor the progress of the activities that are being conducted on location. That will be reported back and submitted through reports, which we then look at and validate through the various committees of the adaptation benefit mechanisms, executive committee, methodology committees as well. And once that is done, the project would then be able to receive these certified adaptation benefits, and that would be then transferred to off-takers to receive the payments. So it's a cycle that we are in the process of finalizing. When I say in the process of finalizing, because no project yet has been able to deliver the CABs. That being said, the reason for it is because we just launched this in March 2019, and we were planning to complete the first cycle by 2000, I guess it would be this year, and it got postponed into 2025 because of COVID. The Secretariat is currently hosted at the African Development Bank, and we appoint the Executive Committee. We elaborate the terms of reference as well as the project cycle guidance. The methodology panel and the rosters of experts are already formed. And we have, as Garrett was mentioning earlier, 2 pilot projects that are under development. So the one that he mentioned was the one in Ivory Coast for the resilient cocoa. And we also have a rapid deployment dams to counter flooding in Nigeria. So far, we've gotten 1 methodology approved, which is the cold storage of potatoes in Kenya. And the long-term view would be to be able to establish the African Adaptation Benefit Fund in the long term. Lies the status of the pilot phase of the ABM. Here I'm going to share the excellent committee members, executive committee members that we have that oversee all of these process and procedures to ensure that our methodologies and our final product is of the highest quality possible and can be as competitive to the CERs to bring traction to this innovative mechanism, which is non-market. I will stop here, but if you do have any questions, we will be gladly able to answer them through the ABM mechanism website.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you very much. So we have heard from three contributions, and we know that the common ground of the three contributions is that there is a lack of development capital, especially at subnational level. Let me highlight the sense I have of, we are here talking about the global stock take. In the developing world, especially in Africa, communities are left with the option to adapt or die. In the global stock take, there is no evaluation about their investment to adapt. That's the level of which we are actually overlooking what is happening at the subnational level in our country. So let me see what Audrey will say that will address that issue. How do we ensure that we have more capital finance at the subnational level, especially given that you, as the coordinator of the Green Finance Facility Initiative for Africa at the FDB, how do green banks strategically align their financing model to support SDGs, especially in Africa?
Thank you very much, Luc. Just to maybe set the scene of the financial architecture, green finance architecture in Africa. So we don't really have commercial banks and climate finance provider at a local level, and also to follow and to fulfill SDGs needs of African countries. So because most of the commercial banks see green investment as risky, they don't also know how through blended financing make it attractive and bankable. So at the African Development Bank, we see the lack of climate finance as the biggest impediment for a resilient development in Africa. We know that the needs are huge, 2.8 trillion by 2030 to implement 51 countries' NDCs, but we can also seize this opportunity, an opportunity for green development, for green investments. So how do we turn it into opportunity? As you said, adaptation, those projects on the ground, they will be owned by African project developer, and the solution is in their hands. So what we do is we create green investment vehicle embedded in existing local financial institution to channel the needed resources and fundings to support and to invest into local projects. So through the African Green Bank initiatives, we work with government, with existing financial institutions, first by bringing technical assistance to help them set up this green investment vehicle, this local green investment vehicle, and after to capitalize them. Today in the public, we have DBSA representatives, which have developed the first climate finance facility for the South African region. And this is a very good example of how we can bring climate finance at a local level.
Well, you have kept it short, but still, someone says we need banking, but we don't need banks, right? How do you ensure that by setting up green banks, you are not actually worsening the situation? How will that operate at the subnational level to channel the resources to the communities so much that they will do what they know to do best and scale it up?
Exactly, I do agree. We talk also about green banking, green financing, green instrument. Green bank is just a model of it. But, for example, if we take the example of farmers who want to develop more smart agricultural practice, then is looking for funding. They come to maybe his intermediaries, it's maybe a microfinance institution or a tontine. So those local financial intermediaries, we can call it banks, we can call it something else, but they are the funding provider, the financing provider. We work with them, so we build their capacity on how they can help this project developer to strengthen the green component of his project, and also we bring the financing at his level. Why we do that? Because it's like using a carrot to incentivize project developer to make their project greener. And I also want to highlight the ABM, because this kind of financial solution, because it's a financial solution, and ABM is like for the carbon market, because the carbon market has been created after the Kyoto Protocol with this new interest we were given to carbon, to the CO2 emission. Before there was no market. So for ABM, we are creating a new market now, because we make now bankable and interesting in terms of revenue stream some activities we have no interest before. For example, if you have a community who's taking care of its mangrove, there is no revenue of it. Mangrove is just seen as bring revenue just when you cut it because you want to do fishery, but here, by taking care of this mangrove, then they can generate revenue through the ABM through this tool. That's why, as well, green banks as a local financier has a role to play, because if they recognize ABM as an eligible product, such as the carbon credit, then they will be eager to lend money for this ABM and the certified benefit, the certificate.
Well, you seem to be convinced, and we will check on you later on. I will get back to you with that. So now let me move to Mrs. Paula de Almeida. You are the officer in charge of food, agriculture, and water investment strategy for Pegasus Capital. In your view, what are the most significant barriers to attracting and securing international investment for SDGs implementation in Africa?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I'm actually going to answer that with a lens from food and ag, because it would be actually unfair for me to try to generalize that answer, given that every SDG is very different and the intervention required is very different. And so that's my first point, to make sure that we are very clear on the requirements and the structure for the complexities of each of these SDGs. And that means that they are systems interventions that need to come along, right? We need to think about, for each SDG, what's the system that needs to be transformed? What are the required investments related to that? And that leads me to the second point that I think is important to make as it pertains to this particular question, that because we are intervening in a system, we need to consider it as such from a risk and investment assessment model. And today we operate to very standardized, very finite ways in which we evaluate that. And that means that we're not potentially accounting for the totality of the various factors. And you mentioned earlier around the human capital potential, right? Communities either thrive or they die. And that has a specific component to how we evaluate the value, both tangible and intangible value that's created within the system. The third point I wanted to make is, and that means that in that context, we're going to need a whole new set of data points and analytics to support those decisions as it relates to the systems. And we are generating a lot of data today in the system. It's not enough, and it's not fully integrated. So the insights for how we make those decisions in terms of returns and investments and risk is not fully complete yet. But I think it's coming. The third point is that we often tend to generalize, and this is especially exacerbated in the context of food and ag and water systems. We generally tend to generalize solutions as a whole once, and we know that Africa in particular, when it comes to food security and agricultural systems, has a span of maturity and capability in that area. And so you need to be very contextual for how you drive your interventions, the investments as it relates to the capacity that you're building. And we need to have that nuance in the investment strategy to support the not just each country, but the region as a whole, regions within Africa. And then last, I think I wanted to pick up on a point that Garrett mentioned, is that, and David also mentioned, we need we have multiple parties that are interested in driving this, and we need this ecosystem. From data, especially in food systems today, from a traceability standpoint, which are required all over the world now from a compliance standpoint, but much more than that, I think even within COVID, we started to realize we knew a lot about our supply chains. We don't, but we're developing that knowledge now. And that means that, yes, we can generate macro views of the data and assessments, but now we need to double click and create later.
It's insufficient depth in terms of our financial market system. So if you look at, for instance, within the region, our financial market systems tends to be relatively unsophisticated. I think South Africa is probably the lead in terms of that. And what you tend to find as a result of that is fragmented information. And investors generally look for more reformed type of financial market system that offer some level of comfort and acceleration in terms of that green investment isn't happening at the pace that it should be, right? But it is of course a legacy issue. The other problem is constrained sovereign budgets. So this reliance of, for instance, sovereign guarantees, we shouldn't have that dependency on sovereign guarantees, even though, of course, most investors would ordinarily want to see that because it's a way of obviously de-risking projects. It does at times tend to stifle government budgets, right? So those are some of the challenges from a kind of a bankability issue. Most of the projects as well, and I'm talking more specifically in regards to, let's say, environmental projects, tend to be quite small, so the ticket sizes tend to be quite small, and they don't really offer the level of attractiveness from an investor perspective. Most investors are looking for scale, right? Big scale utility type of projects that they can actually invest their disbursements into. So tend to be quite lengthy, and that's why you're not also seeing the level of investments that you should be, because the permitting process is just too long, So there are a number of challenges, and also, and I kind of mentioned this, is just the lack of green fiscal reforms that you're not seeing in some of the region. Opportunities, and I mean, if you look at opportunities, I think this in itself, as much as it is a challenge, it does present an opportunity in terms of basically transforming the African landscape and the African narrative, so that the African continent can now start even taking charge of its energy use, right? So that in itself presents a challenge. If you look at, for instance, DBSA and what we've been able to do, I mean, we fund throughout the entire value chain, right from project planning, where we assist municipalities in terms of how to plan various programs. And then obviously we have a very strong project preparation team as well, where we effectively provide catalytic funding into pre-feasibility studies that then would take those projects right to full bankability. So those are the opportunities that that the bank has been able to create to de-risk some of the projects that we're seeing, because the biggest hurdle is at that sort of pre-feasibility phase, where you're not seeing the level of either kind of funding that's required to get the projects to full bankability, So that's been quite useful to see. And of course, we've been able to also create various type of funding facilities, more specifically nuanced to the energy sector. As you would know, the climate finance facility is one such facility, which also offers, for instance, credit enhancement capabilities, where you've got first loss risk cover, where we're able to basically take some level of a risk absorption in a project, and that in itself also creates kind of crowds in the private sector investment that's required. So the principle around additionality, then we were able to create as a DFI.
But then we have heard about the role data play in the process. What are the key data you need or you collect precisely in advancing or addressing those challenges in your project?
So the key data.
Yeah.
In regards to the challenges. So, I mean, for instance, just starting looking at the pre-feasibility phase, for instance. So the one issue is also the issue around the own contribution. So what tends to happen is that there is usually a requirement that the sponsor provide their own, some level of their own funding into the project, for instance. The other one is just technical challenges. So there may be some issues, niggling issues around, for instance, either geotech studies not being adequately done, for instance. It could be, land issues, so the land security not being in place, or there could be, for instance, some kind of land claim. I mean, there are various multiple issues that could basically emanate in regards to why we're not able to basically turn around the projects as quickly as we should.
Thank you. Now let me turn to Teddy. Teddy, you are the CEO of Rwanda Green Fund. You are one of the institutions people used to refer to when they speak about the need to change the narrative about Africa, DBS as well. Now, tell us, could you share some insight on innovative financing mechanisms that have been successful in Rwanda and how they can be replicated or adapted in other countries?
Thank you very much. Let me just come closer. Thank you. So maybe just for context, just want to explain how we even got to these innovative financial instruments. So the Rwanda Green Fund was established a decade ago. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary. And this really came about, following, Rwanda has basically chosen to put climate change or address climate change at the heart of our development. So I think that's also very important. And I like that the focus on the discussion has been SDGs, because I think it's important, and yes, there's the climate, we need to address climate, but it also needs to, whatever we're doing needs to also address our development needs. Now, so we've had green growth and climate resilience strategies. We're the first country to revise our NDCs, but it's one thing to have amazing strategies and policies and another to implement. So the fund has really been put in place to act as a financing vehicle that can attract the climate financing from, mainly bilateral and multilaterals, and it's been attracting mainly grant financing to support public sector, but also play a catalytic role to bring the private sector on board. So really investing in early stage projects and providing the risk capital, patient capital to be able to de-risk, but also attract private investments. Now, over the years, it was one basket fund that we're trying to use the financing to support public and private sector, and we did realize that wasn't really working because the way you support public and private sector is definitely different. But also the instrument, we just had one instrument that was looking to provide R&D support to private sector, and we didn't get as much. You'd think that you have this grant up to $300,000 for private sector players, and obviously we needed them to provide some co-financing of up to 25%. But even with that, over a period of 6 years, the uptake was really, really low, and so we wanted to understand why. And so back in 2017, 2018, with the support of the African Development Bank, we basically started this journey of understanding. Before we get to something, I think the main point today, I think whatever we come up with needs to address the need. So we started a discussion of the Green Bank, establishing a Green Bank in Rwanda, and it's taken time, but I'm really glad that it did, because we had to take a step back and first of all conduct a market assessment to understand what are the needs, what are the needs of our private sector players. But also looking at the institutional arrangement. Do we need a facility? Do we need a new bank? Do we need a facility that is embedded in existing institutions? Anyway, just forward, if I can just maybe go through that quickly. That market assessment helped us to, one, understand the needs, and the first, if I can say, the first outcome of this was that if you want to support the private sector, especially our private sector players in Africa, you need to have a wide range of financial products. So you can't treat private sector into just two and say, okay, I'll give them loans or grants. It was really important to understand that we needed to provide tailored financial products that really cut across the business life cycle. Specifically in Rwanda, we still have a young private sector ecosystem. So not everybody is really at the level of accessing loans from the commercial banks. So we needed to also look at that initial phase. What kind of support do they need to get to this, to be able to scale and approach the financial institutions? And the second objective why we wanted to also have this private sector facility was also for us to be able to attract, if we want to achieve our NDCs, there's no way we're going to do it through public investments. So this was also the second objective. We needed to unlock private capital out there. Third was also to be able to work with the commercial banks. So to cut the story short, last year at COP27, we launched Ireme Invest. So Ireme Invest is Rwanda's green investment facility, which has actually been created and is embedded within existing institutions. So we, as the Rwanda Green Fund, are not administered by the central bank. So we actually approached the Development Bank of Rwanda and said, can we come up with a partnership where we're able to use the green banking model and have a project preparatory facility that can support the early start, the early stage, be able to provide grants. We're looking at recoverable grants and equity eventually. And then have a credit facility that is embedded within the Development Bank of Rwanda, because through consultations, it was very clear from the Ministry of Finance, Central Bank, that we don't necessarily need a new bank, a new green bank. You just have to see what within the I think someone said yesterday I was at an event and they said all the banks just need to be green. We don't need additional green banks. We just need existing banks to really take this the whole conversation around supporting SDGs and green. So I don't know if I've answered, but yeah, in a nutshell, I think it's very important that whatever we're coming up with, and this needs to be contextualized as well. Obviously, I think what has been what has been successful is that we're comfortable with what we've created, because we believe that this green investment facility is coming to address the needs. And two, we've already seen, we've been able to capitalize over 200 million USD in just 1 year and a half, and very happy that we've been working closely with the African Development Bank, and we're just the last board meeting from the GCF approved 42 million USD. So I think really the funding is out there. But it's also very important for us as African countries, and maybe to answer the second question, how can this scale? I think for me the lesson is we have to do what works for us, because not all the money out there is also good for us. So we're looking for long-term financing. We're looking for affordable financing, right? With everything that's going on in the world right now. So it's important that whatever structures we put in place are addressing the needs. So if it's for private sector players, it needs to be coming in to address their needs. But we also want to make sure that we are attracting financing that we can easily deploy. Thank you.
Well, don't you see the risk that you being a green fund and not a green bank, and that this may not help the bank to go green?
Again, I think it's when we're looking at tackling the climate change issue, it really requires for different. We all need to come together, and I don't see one thing, beating the other, because so the role of the fund within this green investment facility is the project preparation facility, which is what we've kind of been doing. But with this, we're able to provide more financial products, not just grants, which we also need to think of the sustainability. We have the grants, we have the recoverable grants, and equity is something we're actually right now working on. And this actually helps the bank. So the pipeline conversation, right? So if we're able to provide that early stage support to the feasibility studies and help the businesses to grow, then we're able to develop a pipeline. So our role is really pipeline development, which is great for the banks, and then the banks it can be the Development Bank of Rwanda or other commercial banks. So just yesterday we had our Bank of Kigali, the biggest commercial bank, and we already started discussing because of the green investment facility. So we see it as it's actually going to catalyze the entire financial sector. Thank you.
Catalyze is the point. Before I turn to you, ladies and gentlemen, I have a question to you, for you, Monique. there's one thing that is plaguing climate action, is the divide between adaptation and mitigation. When you go for nature-based solution, for instance, when you adapt in the context of sustainable development, you mitigate. When you mitigate in the context of sustainable development, you adapt. How is ABM going to help to do that precisely?
I think the ABM is meant to have co-benefits, of which we first promote resolving an adaptation issue, which then also benefits a mitigation problem. So it brings a solution to a mitigation solution. So it is not mutually exclusive to just an adaptation problem, but it also does drive mitigation action. So I think that's how, and that's what is particular, is that we actually favor the adaptation solution first, as opposed to what is being done now, where mitigation projects also address certain adaptation issues currently, but they are not incentivized to do so. So I think that the adaptation benefit mechanism does that reversal and really brings adaptation action to shine first, and then address mitigation solution afterwards.
Well, thank you, Monique. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is your turn to ask questions to our wonderful panelists. Who want to go first? Well, sir, please. Yes, the mic is coming.
Okay, thank you for this enlightening discussion. I think I would have two main questions. The first one is, concerning, this certification of the benefits. How is exactly, measure this benefit? Is it a carbon, a life cycle assessment, or anything else? Okay. So more clearly a physical question. And then, honestly, I have to admit that I'm more, eager to think of Pigouvian solution than cohesion one, but I do understand why a bank is more on this side. But how can you then give a value to these physical benefits? And how can you avoid what has happened in Europe, for example, with the carbon market, and to have, a strong decrease of the value on the market, and so not achieving the first goal? Okay.
To protect the coastline, or it could be hectares of land that are doing it. So and in that sense, the adaptation benefits mechanism, it's a results-based payment mechanism, but actually it has the flexibility for the buyer and the seller to agree the results that you want to pay for and what the project developer can deliver. So it's very flexible in that sense, and we have a methodology panel to ensure that that process is scientifically rigorous. Now, on the second point then, on the costing, and this is I could talk for a long time about this, but I'll try not to.
I'm here.
With the costing, what we try to do is to plug the financial gap in the project. So if and we just take a simple figure, if a farmer needs $500 to help him or her to transition from their current practice, I'd also like to ask a question to Matapelo and Teddy. Teddy, you started to touch on it, on how the Green Bank was transforming the rest of the banking economy, and I'd like to hear from Matapelo if you're seeing the same thing in South Africa, because we have this challenge of Paris alignment throughout the financial sector, and we hope that green banks and green funds would start to interest other banks, commercial banks, to develop in that direction. And are you seeing that happening in South Africa? And Teddy, maybe a little bit more what you're seeing in Rwanda.
Okay, sure. So in South Africa, we don't have specific green banks. So what you tend to find is that within the banks, you'll have various initiatives that are actually intended to drive the green economy, right? So, and I mean, the DBSA, I think, is a very good example where, we are working with various other international institutions to create very nuanced or specific funds that are meant to drive specific agendas around the green economy. Like, and I'll give you an example. We've got the Embedded Generation Investment Program that is, it's a ZAR-based facility, in other words, a South African-based fund, which is intended to address the cost of funding issue that we've been facing on some of our commercial and industrial renewable energy projects, right? So each of these specific energy funds are addressing various specific nuanced issues that we're facing, if that makes sense. So, I mean, and other banks, what other banks are doing is that they're issuing green bonds, for instance. So, you know, most of these financial institutions are basically trying to increase and accelerate their targets around, you know, the green agenda. And I don't think we'll ever get to a point where we have specific green banks that are created in South Africa. I don't see the South African market moving towards that direction.
Teddy?
Yes. So quite similar. For me, I actually see, you know, when we started the discussions of the Green Investment Facility, obviously there's different consultations that we had even with the banks, because the idea is that if the Development Bank of Rwanda is able to attract highly concessional loans, there's an on-lending, you know, aspect to it, so we obviously want to make sure that even though it's just this one facility, we need to be speaking to the ecosystem. So I definitely see, you know, the catalytic role has already started before we've actually even, you know, started the implementation, because we've been doing mostly the design and capitalization in the past 1 year. But the need is there, and we see, you know, just like I was saying, the commercial banks are already joining the conversation, and they want to know how they could work with the Green Investment Facility. There's also different, so a lot of the banks have also come up front and said, but, you know, we're still struggling with understanding what green projects mean. So we're now developing our green taxonomy, you know. So there's a lot of things that are happening, you know, that are kind of going to support, you know, the whole process. But so far, it looks very, very positive. And again, because we're focusing mostly on the pipeline development, that just becomes, I mean, that makes it easier, again, to talk to the commercial banks. So, yeah, I think I would say that the feedback is positive. Thanks.
Thank you. Back to you. Who else? Well, while you are getting ready to, someone? Well, I still have questions for you. Matapelo, the private sector.
I'm not off the hook just yet. Eh?
Yes, because it's about energy, and the energy is the blood of the economy. And in Africa, there's a lot we have to still move a long way to understand what sustainable energy means, how we build a sound mix to make it work. But for a private sector, sometimes it is a choice of going, you know, renewable or not. And the front investment that are needed, for instance, to go renewable are much higher than if you want to go for, you know, fuel-based energy production. So how do you package your offer for a private sector to rather look at renewable energies? How do you do that?
Look, I think that's an interesting question. You know, I think that because of, and I'll speak specifically to the DBSA now. I mean, we are a government-backed institution, and of course, I'd say almost 60% of our loan book is really geared towards supporting the South African government, and then obviously the rest is split between SADC and ex-SADC. But our energy strategy is quite comprehensive. It really follows the integrated resource plan of South Africa, which is very much based on a mixed energy use. You know, not just looking at renewable energy, but it's far more. It's much wider than that. And again, it's because of our legacy issue as South Africa, right? South Africa's economy was actually based on the mining industry, you know. And if you look at, for instance, even our energy source, most of it is still very much dependent on coal. Of course, we are moving away from that, you know, which is why we've developed the Just Energy Transition Plan for the country. But it's an evolution, right? That will take time. But going back to your question, I think that the way we're looking at it now is definitely towards supporting, you know, renewable energy projects. In fact, I'd say most of our disbursement is really geared towards supporting renewable energy projects, and projects that have very clearly articulated Just Energy Transition Framework, i.e., you know, projects that have a very clear agenda in terms of decarbonization. I hope that addresses your question. So,
I will get back to you about that. Well, we have heard that, in fact, we don't need green bond, but you have been promoting green bond. So what has to change?
So just, I mean, we call it African Green Bank Initiatives, but don't be misled by the name. It's because we are promoting the Green Bank model. What is the Green Bank model? Is that you have a project preparation facility, which work with the lendings windows, and this is what actually you can see with the Rwanda Green Investment Facility. You have this project preparation facility which is run by Teddy, and also you have the lending part which is hosted in the Development Bank of Rwanda. So this is those kind of vehicles which are really important to mainstream in African countries and at a local level, because they host the concessional money, and this is the concessional money which will be able to de-risk the transaction, and they will syndicate other capital provider, other financer. And you were mentioning just later how, and Gareth, this is your question, how is it changing actually the financial architecture in those countries? Because now, for example, in Kenya, in Rwanda, you will have all the commercial banks. They will know that there is IREME. IREME is the name of the Rwanda Green Investment Facility. There is IREME who is there. So if they have a customer who comes to them and with a green project and there is interest, they say, okay, your project needs some preparation grant to strengthen the green component. Then they know that they can come to IREME. And IREME will support bringing this project, this grant, or reimbursable grant to strengthen the project, and also will also work and has a lead arranger on this transaction, because they will be able to, with these commercial banks, provide as well co-financing, and also bring all the DFIs or commercial banks at the table to make sure that this project find the fundings which is needed.
Well, thank you. I have heard from the CEO of Gold Standard that during the last decade, they have certified some 3,000 projects in the world. 50% is in Africa. And we are still talking about lack of capacity and the fact that Africa is not playing such a major role in the carbon market. What has to change? Now, that question is for you all. Starting with Paola.
Okay.
What do we need as data or whatever? That has to change. Yeah. Yes. For instance, if we have already such a role being played, de facto, that is the data. Huh? That is data. Out of the 3,000 projects, 50% has been implemented in Africa. And we still continue to say Africa is not harnessing the carbon market, is not playing the role because of lack of capacity. What has to change?
Yeah, I think, another data point to add to that is that in the not so distant future, 1 in 4 humans on this planet will be African, right? So I think the necessity and the drive to get that capability built out on the ground tactically, so that you can actually validate those markets and start proving that the system is working, that there is a distance between the desire for these markets and the financing and actually what needs to happen structurally. I'll go back to my point. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it is a system. And oftentimes we don't know the totality of the system yet until we get into that analysis on the ground. And in many cases, it's going to, and I will speak from a food standpoint, it's going to be different no matter what, depending on the raw material that you're talking about. And even in those value chains, you have distinct necessities. Some of them can be leveraged. But so you're talking about the projects and capacity, and sometimes these projects are not going to pass because there are structural, and you talked earlier about policy, right? You talked about the ability for the government to process through what's necessary for and what I like to call flow, for this whole system to scale up and be enacted to have flow in the system. And all it takes, if you think about this positive domino effect of change, all it takes is for one domino to be out of sync for that flow to be broken. And so for me, really, it's about, and I'll go back also to the point I made earlier, it's this ecosystem of players. And we talk about public-private sector partnerships. My question is, do we have the right landscape and ecosystem of players for Africa, both within Africa and outside of Africa? Well, it's a question, I think, for all of us. I think we have a good starting point. I think we have players that are very motivated. And in fact, actually, let me even offer this. Africa has a very fruitful group of folks that are very entrepreneurial. They're thinking about the system very differently because they live in it, they see it firsthand. And so Africa, in my opinion, given some of the technology that's even happening in Africa in terms of solutions for the system, has the opportunity to leapfrog in some senses from other continents. The question is, can you actually assemble that ecosystem fast enough for what's needed on the ground for that intervention?
Well, Teddy, what needs to change for us to assemble that ecosystem and as swiftly as possible?
Well, I'd like to build on that. I think, yes, we do have gaps. We do have capacity gaps. But I think for me, the biggest challenge is that a lot of even when you look at the approach we use to mobilize the resources needed, it's very project-based. It's never programmatic, and I think it builds on to what has just been raised. We need a programmatic approach where we have, so again, I would like to use the example of, to be honest, what's happening with the Green Investment Facility is mind-blowing before we even start dispersing, because it's brought, obviously we're a government fund, so I would say public fund that has partnered with the Development Bank of Rwanda that is mobilizing, concessional loans from DFIs and the Green Climate Fund. And now the commercial banks are interested. So you do need that ecosystem to be working all together to address the needs. Because I think what often happens is that you have so much going on on the African continent, but you have very many scattered, initiatives. It's never about, if Pegasus is good at, apologies if it's to build the bankability of projects, then we should be talking to them, or they should be talking to, then if the African Development Bank is also helping with this. So I just feel like there's a lot of scattered initiatives, and oftentimes we're not all talking together, because if we're all able to come in one room and say, okay, you're going to provide the technical assistance, you're going to provide the grants to support the TA, and you will come in at the stage of bringing the DFI. So we all need to be having the conversation together. So to your point, yes, we do have, everybody has gaps and we all have needs, but I think even with the projects that we have that are bankable, sometimes we don't even know, or the person that's supposed to invest them doesn't know, because it's scattered. So programmatic approach is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to give the floor back to David in 5 minutes. Okay, good. So I have a future-focused question, the second and last one then, to each one of you. Then we will go this way. Future-focused question for each one of the panelists goes this way. Looking forward the future, what emerging trend or innovation in finance do you believe will have the greatest impact on accelerating progress toward the SDGs in Africa? Let me start. Do we need me to repeat my question? I can't. Yes. Looking forward the future, what emerging trends or innovation in finance do you believe will have the greatest impact on accelerating progress towards the SDGs in Africa? Audrey?
Thank you, Luc. I would like to say that we don't need actually something new. We already have the financial products, instruments.
Really?
Yes, we do.
Innovation
we have, yes, but it's just using the product we do have. Like, we are talking about bonds. Now we are talking about green bonds, sustainability-linked bonds. We are talking about green banks, but we have banks to take what we already have. This is really this approach of being programmatic, being inclusive, bring people at the table. So we already, but because we don't bring them together, we think that we have to create and to build something new. We don't. Resources are scarce, so that's why we make it to be and also find practical solution. And for Africa, it was mentioned by in the African context, because we left people aside. You said before, local community, they are resilient. Actually, they are the model we should follow in terms of adaptation and resilience. They are the ones who are supposed to provide a solution and ideas, but we don't listen to them.
That's music to my ears.
Exactly. So in reality, it's just not letting people aside and let them have a voice to the table and try to find solution. And so that's why I'm not about creating something new, but just bring all the creativity and all the brain we have and make something which is customized to countries, African countries, local communities, because they are very different. The type of financial product which will be needed in Rwanda is not the same that will be needed in Benin.
Well, Paola, we are welcome to disagree. So the floor is yours.
I am welcome to disagree. I actually was going to riff off of you. I said, I actually like that because even in innovation, my previous life for Pegasus, I was chief innovation officer for a large food company. And what I would say was, the last 20 to 30 years, the world's created an array of industries. Is going to be the era of recombination. So it's not like the world's not going to create new things. It's just intervention. We can start getting the scale that you're talking about, the acceleration in the system that we have there. So that's number one. I think number two, I'll go back to my point, is I think we're going to get better at return on investment evaluation, especially in my sense in food systems, because we're going to have more data, we're going to have more understanding of the complexities of the totality of the SDG intervention that we need to have, and that probably will be true for all the other SDGs. And so for me, the evolution in thinking and how we see these things, which I think is implicit in what you were saying, and the point you brought about the programmatic approach, I think there's going to be such novel ways of collaboration, partnership, and interventions into the system because it's a necessity right now. We simply cannot go without it.
Well, thank you, Matapelo. What did you say about that? Again, you welcome to disagree.
Yeah, I have a slightly different point.
Thank
so I mean,
you.
I agree with my panelists here, but the point I want to make is that, you know, big ticket size transactions, right? But my biggest concern is that, you know, the ordinary man on the street who doesn't have that level of scale of project, right? And I think we need to start thinking about addressing you know, those smaller transactions in our rural areas, for instance, because even those individuals and commercial industries that are operating at a very small scale have the greatest potential to actually emit carbon. You know, so we need to be, you know, targeting even some of those smaller industrial users.
Yes, but for you, Teddy, in Africa, it's not just about the rural areas. The cities, African cities are largely informal.
Absolutely.
And the public investment
Still at the early stage. So I think, again, I don't think we need new, you know, we don't need new ways and new financial instruments. We just have to do what we said we're going to do right. But this requires for a wide range of stakeholders to communicate, because I think that's the biggest problem. Everybody's trying to do something in their own different, you know, yeah.
Well, thank you, Teddy. Monique, how hopeful are you that ABM will make the difference, you know, in such context, especially building on the early solution, or maybe it's too early to talk about outcome, but the result or the lesson that we could learn from the pilot phase?
A system that we already know, which is the carbon market, of a mechanism that we were already experienced and for which did not resolve the issues of the African context. The funding did not funnel through African countries, projects. It did not resolve the issues that were at hand. And so trying it in a different way through that innovative mechanism, I think will be a driving force into having those funds trickle down to localized people.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is
Partnership, build bridge, so we learn to work together even better, and it's already good. You know, here at COP we met some of each other, so hopefully those relationships will be long lasting, while never underestimating that, you know, all those millions in the end will need to trickle down to the one who actually work, and so we need to work on those education and make sure that all that is done for impact and not just only staying on the financial sector for the financial sector. So I won't take, as promised, too much of your time. Everyone is tired, wants to go to bed or a cocktail. So thanks again. I think you all deserve a great round of applause, and enjoy your evening.